All right, welcome back. And earlier we were just adding some classes into some of your image elements. So we had two classes that we added. We had a bacon class and we had a broccoli class. And what it did was basically change the background color. The bacon is green because that's good. Broccoli is a red background because bad broccoli. All right. And if you've looked around at some of the different attributes that you can add, you may have come across we have these classes, and there's another thing that you can add called an ID. And so, for example, if we want to add an ID, let's go ahead and add an ID to this H1 element. So to do that, I would say ID, the heading, so let's call it heading. And we add an ID just like we added classes, just a little bit different. So let's go ahead and add a different section. Call this ID. And then to call upon an ID, we're going to start it with a hashtag. So hashtag, and we call it heading. And everything else is just like it was before. So my heading, let's make this the color blue. All right, and so we can get an idea. And when I run this, now all of a sudden it's changing the color of this to blue. Now, why does it actually, how does it pick which one to do? Because earlier we said that when we tried to style the H1 element, we said it was red. And now we're doing the identification and it's turning it blue. So in order to do this, we're actually going to use a very important tool called the Chrome Developer Tools. And so if I open this web page, all right, so here's my HTML page. I just opened it on its own separate, like full-on web page. But to get to the Chrome Developer Tools, you're going to right-click and go to Inspect, or Control-Shift-I is the hotkey. Now, this is why we use Chrome. So if you're on a Mac or a PC, we want to use Chrome. If you're on a Chromebook, you have Chrome. Now, the school Chromebooks, I'm still figuring out this might be blocked for you guys. But I absolutely, we want to be able to have this. So I am talking to the district to get this unlocked for all you guys. It's not the end of the world if we don't have it, but it lets us see some things. So I'll show you kind of what's going on. So if we hit Inspect, what it does is this is the Chrome Developer Tool. And over here is all of our HTML that we wrote. If you notice, when I put it over a certain part, it highlights everything. So this is the body. I have my mouse over the body and it's highlighting everything in the body, right? And so I want to click this little drop down arrow, and here's all of the HTML that we wrote. When I highlight certain parts, it shows on the screen what's going on. And then so if I click this heading, I can now see over here on the right-hand side, I can see all the CSS styling that I've put in. And what we notice is that right here is the ID that I just styled, the heading, and see this little check mark next to color. And then down here is the H1 style that we put in for the tag. And this one's crossed out. So what this shows us is that IDs and classes always overwrite just basic tag styles. Okay. And what's cool is, you can uncheck this to comment it out. I can check that. And so if I take this out, now the original, the H1 style is now what's going on. And if I say, no, I want to use this, that ID overrides the tag style. That is what shows up. So the basic lesson of all this is any of the IDs or the classes that you write are always going to overwrite just the basic CSS rules that you write for any just normal elements or tags. Okay, so using this, again, this is just another way of kind of adding some flexibility that you can style everything to be red and then overwrite certain things that you want to change. So what is the difference between an ID and a class? Well, the common analogy is kind of like a passport, right? The class would be like the name. So there's a lot of Joshes in the world. I am definitely not the only one. So a lot of Joshes, a lot of people can have the name Josh. That would be like the class, right? A lot of different elements and tags can all have the same class. But only I have a passport that has my passport number in it. So that would be like an ID. You are only going to be able to use an ID once on a single page. So I can only use this ID heading one time. Okay. And CSS doesn't really care, but this is just the best practice that we want to use. So I could put other IDs other places. I could say ID equals first paragraph. Okay, and that would be totally fine. But what I can't do is do another ID of heading. Right? That would be using it twice, and that would break the rules, and it wouldn't really work. Now, when you're using Replit, they kind of do some stuff behind the scenes and fix some of your mistakes. So it might actually work in Replit, but once we tried to get this working on like a normal, just by its own web page, it wouldn't be happy if you use the same ID. So a lot of people get that mixed up. The ID you're only going to use for a single unique thing. Classes we can use. I could use this class bacon on whatever the heck I wanted. Okay, so I could say class equals bacon here. I could use that twice. Give a green background to whatever I put it. Okay. Now, one big difference between IDs and classes is with a class, you can actually apply multiple classes to the same element right here. So, for example, if I wanted to add another class so that the broccoli emoji right here is circular instead of nice and square. So what we could do is let's add another class. So broccoli, and all I do is separate all the classes that I want to add to this with a space. So broccoli and then circular. So I'm going to be applying the class broccoli and the other class circular to this image right here. So what I need to do is go in and make a new class called circular. And that would be, that is a border radius of 100%. And what this does is this says that we want, this is just a property that we can change for the border of our image. And 100% is a full circle. So when I run this, when I click run, what it's going to do is apply the broccoli class as well as the circular class, broccoli class as well as the circular class to this image. Run. Now I have this circular border to my image, and all is well. All right. The last thing I want to introduce to you guys is actually something called a pseudo class. So a pseudo class is something, if you were looking around on the MDN page, you may have noticed that some of these properties here have colons in front of them. So what that means is it depends upon the state that your selector is in. So for example, if I wanted to, like one of the more common ones used is a hover. So for example, if I hover my mouse over image, I can actually, that is a state, right? So the computer is actually recognizing where my mouse is, and if my mouse is over a particular element, it knows that I am hovering over that. So if we go to our MDN, hover, right, this gives us some examples of what we can do with the hover pseudo class. So if we're looking at this hover pseudo class, you can take a look and see how it's written. It takes the tag, then we're going to put colon hover. And so what this is saying is that when you hover your mouse over, for their example, it's an anchor tag. So if you put your mouse over this anchor link, right, then it would change the color to orange. We're actually going to use the images to do so. So what we can do is I'm going to go and uncomment this. Okay, and what we're saying is I want the image colon hover. So when I'm hovering my mouse over an image, let's change the background color to something we haven't used yet. Let's go gold. Okay, so if I run that, now anytime that I take my mouse right here, and then let's just go and on the big, anytime I take my mouse and I hover over an image, it's going to change that background color to gold, right? So you can play around with those different pseudo classes. There's a whole lot of things you can do. You can look up all that stuff. It's wherever there is a colon in front of the property. Lots of stuff have the colons. And go ahead and play around and find a way to kind of just personalize this website to yours. And go ahead and submit that web page. And you got one more little ticket out the door to do on Canvas. And that is it.